there. And also NASA astronaut Nick Hague and the third crew member still on board, NASA astronaut Christina Cook. They're remaining on board and are now crew members of Expedition 60. It's being led by Alexey Ovchinin, who took the keys to the station from Kononenko during a ceremony yesterday. And they're going to remain on board for the next couple of months, for Christina Cook staying all the way through 2020, thanks to a couple of seat swaps enabling a short duration mission later this fall. But again, this was just a few hours ago. This was a chance for them to say farewell before making their way into that Soyuz spacecraft, after which the hatches were closed. There's two hatches that we pay attention to. There's one on the very top of the Soyuz where it's connected to the station. That's the Soyuz hatch. And then there's one on the station side itself, which actually has the docking cone to which the docking probe of the Soyuz spacecraft attaches to once it connects. There's a small space between the two hatches called the vestibule. That's one of the first items on the checklist for them to check out. They have to actually depressurize it or get all of the air between the two vehicles vented overboard to bring it down to vacuum, just to make sure that you have a nice, smooth, and slow departure once it's time to undock. But there you can see, again, the crew waving one last time before moving it on board. Oleg Kononenko had the con for a lot of the ops today, as he is the Soyuz commander, so he's sitting in the center seat for all of today's operations, also in overall command of the spacecraft as it makes its way back down towards Earth. But first up was getting these hatches closed so they could begin getting into their spacesuits, doing leak checks, and just getting the vehicle ready to go. You see Kononenko doing a final wipe down of the hatch seal just to make sure no foreign object debris or FOD, as you'll commonly hear it called, could interrupt a good seal for the spacecraft. So again, those two hatches were closed at about 3:15 p.m. Central Time, while the station was flying just to the east of Tokyo, coming right on time to get the crew through the first steps of making their way back home. Again, after they get the hatch closed, it was right into doing a series of leak checks, so just making sure you have both a good hatch close and a good seal on both the Soyuz spacecraft, but then also on the station itself. But before the two vehicles separate, the crew members also work to get into their so-called launch and entry suits. They're the white suits that you saw them wearing in that photograph just a little while ago. They wear those for all the different dynamic phases of flight, including launch and landing, thus the name. And they also do leak checks on those suits, as they are able to pressurize just in the event of a loss of cabin pressure, provide breathing gases and pressurization to the crew members, and all of that went smoothly so far this morning, or this evening, not tracking any issues with the suits before they undocked. They were able to do so right on time. Again, this is a replay. You see Ovchinin closing the hatch on the station side, and once that was done, it was just a couple of leak checks away from being time for the Soyuz to undock and depart. And then it was time, and that came right at 6:25 p.m. Central Time, 7:25 p.m. Eastern. The Soyuz and the station flying just over eastern Mongolia, departing from the Poisk module. This was actually a view from the camera right on the business end of the Soyuz spacecraft, pointing back at the station. You can see we actually got we were treated to some really stellar high-definition views of the spacecraft as it departed from the station, thanks to the Cronus officer here in Mission Control Houston. The vehicle slowly backing away at an initial rate of just about 1/10 of a meter per second. It was propelled away by springs, actually, in the docking module that it was attached to. And then following that successful back way, they executed a departure burn, just a quick 8-second firing of engines on the Soyuz, just ramping things up by about 1/2 meter per second to begin backing away even faster. That happened when it was just about 15 meters or just about 45 feet away from the International Space Station. But everything went smoothly with the departure. The Soyuz, at this point, several kilometers away from the space station. And pretty soon, it's going to be setting up for the actual Deorbit Burn, which will be our next big milestone in tonight's journey. And that's going to that's going to be what actually sets the Soyuz spacecraft up to come home. But again, a successful undocking earlier today, setting the stage for our landing, and now we are just a few tasks away until the spacecraft is beginning to make its way through the Earth's atmosphere. And to give you an idea of what's to come, so the Deorbit Burn, which is targeted in just about 15 minutes from now, it's going to come at 8:55 p.m. Central Time, will be that final firing of the large engines on the service module section of the Soyuz, just to change its orbital path to eventually intersect with the ground. Following that, there will be the separation of modules. The three pieces of the Soyuz spacecraft will break apart. The upper and lower portions will burn up in the atmosphere, leaving the middle portion, the descent module, where the crew is housed inside, protected by a heat shield to survive that fiery re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere. As when you first hit it, you're doing several thousand miles an hour, the friction building up around it does heat things up, but the crew kept safe by that heat shield, eventually getting to where we deploy the parachutes, those drogue chutes, getting Commander to come up just about 15 minutes before landing. Initial slowing done by that drogue parachute. Once it drops away, the larger main chute comes out and slows the vehicle down even further. By the time that main chute is done with its job, the Soyuz will only be going about 7.2 meters per second, or about 16 miles an hour, and then it's over to the soft landing engines once they're just about 3 feet off the ground, a little less than 3 feet, to do that final slowing to just about 3 miles an hour, and then they'll touch down in Kazakhstan. And this is a map of the expected landing site for today's operations. You can see that bullseye target just to the southeast of a town called Jezkazgan, and that's where a lot of the search and recovery forces are going to be coming from, at least those coming on helicopters. That's been their staging site. We did get reports that the bulk of the landing forces are already in position at the airport. They'll usually get into the air about an hour or so before touchdown, so right around the time we're doing the deorbit burn, begin making their way to the landing zone, so they'll be able to quickly react. They typically try to find the capsule while it's still under parachutes, and then get on the ground moments after to begin extracting the crew. They'll be operating a variety of vehicles for today, including some fixed-wing airplanes to provide overwatch and communication support to the different teams. A lot will be riding out there on the Russian Mi-8 helicopters you can see in the lower left-hand screen, including the group bringing out the inflatable medical tent that will be set up at the site for the initial checkouts, also giving the crew members a chance to get out of those entry suits and change into something a little bit more comfortable for the flight back to the airport. So a number of all-terrain vehicles also making the journey out to the landing site, including one that will eventually hoist the capsule up and place it and then drive it to a local airport to begin its flight back to Moscow.
Yes. Copy. And on page 60, that will be deactivation of VP1. Copy. And it is the parachute altimeter.
Meanwhile, there are 3 crew members still on board the International Space Station. They are the crew of Expedition 60. Starting on the left there, that's Christina Cook, a NASA astronaut who's going to remain on board all the way through February of next year, thanks to some seat swaps that are being done to enable a short duration flight of the United Arab Emirates' first ever astronaut a little bit later this fall. In the middle there is Alexey Ovchinin. He's the commander of Expedition 60. He took the reins over from Oleg Kononenko yesterday during their traditional change of command ceremony. And this is his second long-duration stay aboard the International Space Station. On the right there is Nick Hague, another NASA astronaut, also a first-time flyer. A lot of this 2013 class now going through and getting their first flights. Both Hague and Cook, members of those class, along with McClain, who's making her way back home right now, wrapping up 204 days in space. As of now, well, before our undocking a little bit earlier, there were 4 vehicles docked to the station, 2 Soyuz spacecrafts, a Russian Progress cargo vehicle, and the Northrop Grumman Cygnus 11 spacecraft. But now with that successful undocking from that Poisk module, only 3 on board. But that'll only be the case for the next couple of weeks, as less than a month from now, we're looking at having another Soyuz spacecraft with 3 additional crew members set to launch on July 20th, 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 lunar landing. And that will bring 3 additional Expedition 60 crew members, including NASA astronaut Andrew Morgan, along with Russian cosmonaut Alexander Skvortsov and European astronaut Luca Parmitano. Throughout our broadcast, we'll try to get to some of your questions. If you have them, be sure to head over to Twitter, use the hashtag AskNASA, and we'll get to as many as we can. For now, though, we are just under 10 minutes away from the planned start of this Deorbit Burn. That is scheduled to last several minutes, about 4 minutes and 40 seconds in duration, actually changing the velocity of the Soyuz spacecraft to allow it to begin to drop out of orbit. Once it continues to follow its path, it'll change by about 128 meters per second, which is about 286 miles per hour, while there's still about 260 statute miles in altitude.
Module pressure. Intelligible.
And so, as mentioned, we are going to be taking questions from that Ask NASA hashtag. We'll start off with one from Captain Nemo, who wanted to know how many miles per hour will the Soyuz travel after decelerating? Well, it's going to go through multiple different stages, and right now they're traveling many thousands of miles an hour, the orbital velocity right around 17,500 miles an hour. They'll do this deorbit burn and eventually move through entry interface, hitting the upper atmosphere, with the atmosphere actually slowing it down a great deal. Once we get to the time where we open up the parachutes, at that point, right before the chutes open, it's traveling at about 230 meters per second, or about 514 miles per hour, and then that'll eventually slow down to just 80 meters per second, or about 179 miles per hour. That's just the drogue chute, though. Once the main parachute pops out, that'll continue to slow it down to a much more manageable 7.2 meters per second, or about 16 miles an hour. That would still be fairly jarring for a touchdown on land, though, so they do have those soft landing engines which fire when they're just a little under 3 feet off the ground, or about 0.8 meters, and that gives them a final descent rate of 1.5 meters per second, or about 3.3 miles per hour. So from 17,500 miles an hour all the way down to 3.3 and eventually to 0 once they're back down on Earth. And our next one comes from Prashant, who wanted to know what would be the time spent in orbit. Who's the most excited for the landing among the 3? No way of knowing definitively for that second part, but it is the first ever landing for David and Anne, so this will be the first time they get to experience a touchdown in Kazakhstan. This is the 4th time for Kononenko, and again, their total time in space on this mission was 204 days. And so that's 204 total days for both Mclain and David. For Kononenko, though, as we mentioned, he's up to 737 days, good enough for 6th on the all-time duration list. Our next one comes from Layla, who wanted to know, is there a difference between the ship's speed when it's in space and after entering the Earth's atmosphere? And yes, there is. We just went through that a little bit. A lot of that initial deceleration does happen just by the friction and the buildup of re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. So again, they'll be going from several thousand miles an hour at the time of the deorbit burn, eventually through the entry, and then ultimately slowing down to just a couple hundred miles an hour before those parachutes start to come out, and that does the bulk of the slowing down after that.
5.5 minutes to escape there. 760 is pressure the descent module. Copy. Five minutes to escape activation. Copy. 757 is the pressure in a descent module. We have combined gasoil. Copy.
And so that voice you're hearing is actually a translator, so we're starting to get some comm back with the Soyuz as it's about to pass over Russian ground sites once again, or it's about to be into ground site capabilities. We should have this acquisition of signal with them shortly. The deorbit burn, again, that's the next major milestone coming up, and that's about a little over 4 minutes from now. And that will be a 4-minute, 39-second firing of those primary engines on the Soyuz service module. And that's what's actually going to allow it to eventually slip out of orbit. So right now they're still at an orbital velocity and on an orbital track, but this will speed them up by about 128 meters per second, so a couple hundred miles an hour. And that will actually change their orbital trajectory to eventually intersect with the planned landing site in Kazakhstan, where they are targeted to touch down. But continuing to get a little bit of comm between the crew on board and the flight controllers and Mission Control Moscow, where we're getting a live look. Again, standing by, that deorbit burn coming up in just about 3.5 minutes. We did get some initial weather reports from the teams over in Kazakhstan. It looks like they have some light winds, temperatures around 71 degrees Fahrenheit or about 22 degrees Celsius. So will be some very good conditions for these crew members once they get back. It will be vastly different from the conditions they launched in back in December, as Kazakhstan gets very snowy, very windy, and very cold in the winter months. But should be a very nice kind of springtime, early summer landing for these crew members, again, who are going to be getting their first breath of fresh air in 204 days once they touch down in just a little while. So everything on track, tracking for that deorbit burn in 2.5 minutes. We'll continue to stand by and get some updates as they come in, but everything going smoothly so far with today's operation. Getting ready for Oleg, Kononenko, David Saint-Jacques, and Mclain to soon be back on planet Earth.
1 minute to SKD activation. Copy.
We are under 1 minute away from that deorbit burn again. That's going to be the burn that's going to send them on a trajectory to come back down through the Earth's atmosphere.
G3 command is being issued. G3 command is issued. Switching to monitoring. 30 seconds. Opening SKD cover. Gasol, that is combined gasol in attitude. Copy. 15 seconds. 10. 555 SKD activation. Copy. Pressure 14 at the burners. Acceleration point 47. Copy.
Visiting vehicle officer here in Houston confirming the deorbit burn is in progress.
20 kilograms propellant spent. Copy. 30 seconds burn 13.4. 32 kilograms of propellant burn. KDU parameters are within norm. Copy.
So everything looking good so far. Again, this burn expected to last about 4 minutes and 39 seconds.
49 kilograms propellant spent. One minute, 26.2 KDU parameters norm. 63 kilograms propellant burned. Copy. 1 minute, 15 seconds. Accelerated to 34.2, 80 kilograms KDU norm, 0.46 acceleration. Copy. 1.5 minutes, 0.46 acceleration, 94 kilograms KDU parameters norm. Copy.
And you're continuing to hear a translation of the crew reporting on the progress of the deorbit burn.
0.4 parameters.
All right, lift off and the clock is starting.
Hey, you're watching NASA TV, on the air and online every day, on this planet and beyond.
The entire burn, delta V is 127.98. Yes, we have separation flag, and SR pressure is 766. The entire burn, delta V is 127.98. Copy. Copy all. Reconfigure CRV.
And with those readouts, the visiting vehicle officer able to confirm the deorbit burn was conducted nominally or normally, following what they expected. You heard the number 127.98 called out. That refers to about a 128 meter per second change in their velocity, also called delta V, using the Greek symbol delta. That translates to about 286 miles per hour change in velocity. So that deorbit burn has just changed their orbital trajectory to mean that they are now going to intersect with that planned landing zone down there in Kazakhstan. So that is another milestone ticked off as we continue to march very smoothly towards an on-time landing today for these three crew members. So again, deorbit burn done successfully, got all of the parameters that we needed to hear, and now ready to move on to the next phase, which will be the separation of modules, coming about 27 minutes after the deorbit burn. So we have a little bit of time until then, about 20 minutes or so, until those modules separate. By that point, they'll have already dropped several hundred kilometers, several miles actually, in altitude. They'll only be about 140 kilometers over the Earth when the modules separate, as opposed to the 430 kilometers that they're at right now for this deorbit burn. But everything continuing to go smoothly. Again, all of this is tracking towards a touchdown in Kazakhstan, targeted right at about 9:47 and 55 seconds Central Time, depending on the video feeds that we get from the Kazakh steppe. We may be able to see that touchdown happen in real time, as we aren't fighting any of the elements. There's pretty good weather out there right now, about 71 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius reported from the teams. So everything continuing to go smoothly, getting some good reports out of the Russian Mission Control Center in Koryov as well.
Slowly but surely, guys. Separation is going to be very soon. Please also check the knee pads. Yes, we are checking the knee pads. One message was illuminated. Copy. The failure of the first manifold went through. Copy all. Did you switch to manifold 2, guys? How copy? Angeles.
And so as mentioned, coming up pretty soon is going to be the actual separation of these modules. That's scheduled to occur at 22 minutes after the hour, so in just about 19 minutes from now. The Soyuz spacecraft is going to separate into 3 different pieces. In the middle is that descent module. That's where the crew is. That has the heat shield and all the critical life support systems that are going to carry them through this final descent phase and through the Earth's atmosphere. The orbital module up on top has the docking probe and will get detached. That was a piece actually attached to the space station that will detach and burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. Before the crew ever undocked, they did a leak check between both the orbital and descent module by depressurizing the orbital module slightly, dropping it a couple of psi, about 170 millimeters of mercury, just to make sure that they had a good seal between the 2 vehicles. Obviously, that's important before you detach one of them in the vacuum of space. So that was done successfully. The propulsion module, the service section, of the bottom will also break away. The orbital and propulsion modules will break up during that atmospheric reentry, leaving the crew in the descent module to eventually carry them through the upper atmosphere and then setting up for the parachute deployments and the touchdown in the Kazakh steppes. So again, the separation of modules going to be the next major milestone that comes about 27 minutes after the deorbit burn. It's targeted for 9:22 p.m. Central Time, 10:22 p.m. Eastern Time. And this gives you just an idea of what we're going to be looking for. So that module separation will happen, and then they'll go into entry interface, experiencing the atmosphere about 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Both the orbital and service module will be burned up during the reentry, but they'll be able to do that controlled descent down through, eventually making their way for the actual deployment of the parachutes. The parachutes are expected to be commanded at about 9:33 p.m. Central Time, 10:33 p.m. Eastern. All of that setting up for the landing at 9:47 and 55 seconds p.m. Central, 10:47 p.m. Eastern.
Combined GSO is confirmed. Combined attitude readiness flag. Copy. Will you get that, Ann? What? Can you get that? Of course. Entries, make sure that our ODF books are not between the seats. Come again, Ildar, what is that? We don't want the books to be between the seats. So nothing should be between the seats. Copy, we're holding our books in our hands. Copy. 14 minutes till our cyclogram starts, till separation. Copy. Copy. Do not put your hands on the tablets during the descent. I mean, your hands should not be on the tablet screens during the descent. Copy? Antares, we wish you to have a soft landing. Thank you, Alexey. Thank you. And we wish you to have a great increment, guys. Thank you. And can you reach the Rus? Manual control. Enter. Yes. 4 minutes left. Copy. Aidar, our transmit button is still pushed. You will need to release it during the separation. Copy all. We will release it right now. Copy. We're doing that right now. Copy. Enter is Moscow.
And this is Mission Control Houston. We are about 10 minutes away from the planned, a little under 10 minutes now from the planned separation of modules that scheduled to come a little after 9:22 p.m. Central, 10:22 p.m. Eastern Time here in the U.S. That'll again be the separation of the Soyuz spacecraft into 3 separate modules, coming in at an altitude a little below 140 kilometers, which is about 87 miles in height.
We are standing by for your report. 9 minutes till separation. Copy. We will close our visors at 9:16. Copy. Copy all. 14 minutes. Copy 14 minutes.
And at this point, we have gotten confirmation that the search and recovery forces are in the air, so those helicopters taking off from Jezkistan, departing for the landing site, typically taking off right around the Deorbit Burn, and then making their way out. It's about a 30 to 45 minute flight, depending on weather conditions from Jezkistan out to the landing zone. Again, the early landing reports, light winds, 71 degrees Fahrenheit, 22 degrees Celsius, so some nice weather awaiting these crew members once they make their way down. And the next milestone is going to be the separation of these modules, coming up in just about 7 minutes.
We just send the command. Copy, and we are deactivating VP1. Copy. Let me check, David. We are activating VP1, and I'm releasing the button again. Copy. Enters, we're getting ready for the separation program. Copy.
And this is Mission Control Houston again. If you're just joining us, we're getting to the latter stages now of this landing tonight. We've successfully completed the deorbit burn, 4-minute, 39-second firing of the engines on the Soyuz spacecraft. That was reported to have been completed successfully, and ultimately sending the spacecraft on its way back down. Everything gone fairly smoothly so far today. The crew reporting an issue with one of the manifolds, so one of the prime propulsion fuel pumps on the spacecraft shortly after that deorbit burn was completed, but the visiting vehicle officer here in Houston confirming they were able to switch to manifold number 2 and then get that full control back over the spacecraft's propulsion systems. So next up is going to be the separation of modules. Again, we're targeting 9:22 p.m. Central Time, 10:22 p.m. Eastern, so just about 5 minutes from now. And that's going to be a command that will separate the Soyuz spacecraft into 3 pieces. The upper portion, the orbital module, and the lower service module portion will separate and burn up in the Earth's atmosphere on a destructive re-entry, leaving the middle portion, the descent module with the 3 crew members on board, protected by a heat shield for that intense heat generated by the re-entry and slowing down through the Earth's atmosphere.
4.5 minutes. Before OSP, the main parachute, reconfig, and position yourself accordingly for the re-entry. Make sure that there is nothing on your lap. Copy.
So again, the separation of modules coming up in just about 3 minutes. After that occurs, the central portion of the Soyuz spacecraft, that descent module, is going to continue to make its way downhill, eventually hitting what's known as entry interface. That comes at about 100 kilometers over the Earth, or just about 62 miles in altitude. That should happen just a little under 3 minutes following the separation of modules at 9:25 p.m. Central Time, 10:25 p.m. Eastern. That's when the vehicle will first start to experience the aerodynamic effects of being in an atmosphere thick enough to actually have an effect on the vehicle as it's coming down. It's expected to enter into the plasma just 10 kilometers later when it's down to about 50 miles, and that coming at about 2:20 or 9:26 p.m. Central, 10:26 p.m. Eastern, exiting that plasma just about 5 minutes later at 31 after the hour. The chutes are going to be commanded to open up at 9:33 p.m. Central, 10:33 p.m. Eastern. We'll be on the lookout for any video from the landing zone, hopefully get a chance to see the Soyuz spacecraft descend under those parachutes. That initial drogue chute slowing it down from 230 meters per second, or about 514 miles an hour, all the way down to 80 meters per second, or 179 miles an hour. Then the main chute will come out and do the final slowing down all the way to 16 miles an hour. And then those soft landing engines firing when it's just about 0.8 meters, or just a little under 3 feet over the ground, slowing it down to a nice soft 3.3 miles per hour or just about 1.5 meters per second before the vehicle touches down. The crew will be on the Kazakh steppe, and again, we're targeting that landing to come at right about 9:47 and 55 seconds Central Time here in Houston. It will be 8:47 in the morning over in Kazakhstan on June 25th when they touch down, just about a little under 3.5 hours after sunrise at the landing site.
11.
So for now, we're going to stand by for that separation call. And the visiting vehicle officer here in Houston confirmed we have module separation, so that coming right on time at 9:22 p.m. Central.
Angeles, Moscow, how copy?
So again, at this point, the modules have separated. We did get a good confirmation of that based off the telemetry here in Mission Control Houston. The visiting vehicle officer working in concert with flight controllers over in Moscow, where we're continuing to get a live view inside of their control room outside Koryov, coming right on time at 9:22 p.m. Central Time, and about 30 seconds after. And those 3 modules now separated. 2 of them are going to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere, and then the one with the crew on board in the heat shield is going to continue to make its way down. As we get into these phases and the vehicle begins to get ready to enter into the plasma, it's not uncommon to lose some audio contact with the crew, but you will continue to hear some call-outs from Mission Control Moscow calling out to the crew, going by the Antares call sign. At this point, they're just about a minute away from what's known as entry interface. That's when they get to an altitude of just about 100 kilometers or 62 miles in height over the Earth's surface. That's when there's enough atmosphere to begin having some aerodynamic effects on the capsule. It's able to make this controlled descent through that entry interface. Marks when they're really starting to get into the atmosphere, and that's when the heat will begin to build up, eventually forming a plasma around the spacecraft once about 4 minutes after the module separation. That coming at about 9:26 p.m. Central. So crew on its way back down now, going to be hitting the atmosphere momentarily. So we'll continue to tune in and give you updates as they come through. And we will have teams there on site in location in Kazakhstan. We'll be on the lookout also for video to see if we can get views of the capsule. We are about 3.5 hours or so after sunrise, so should be plenty of light, good conditions to hopefully see the capsule come down under the parachutes. That's targeted to be commanded at about 9:33 p.m. Central, 10:33 p.m. Eastern Time. And that'll be the drogue chute first, followed by the main parachute, slowing the vehicle down to a much more manageable 16 miles an hour before the soft landing engines do their final job of slowing just before touchdown. Again, we are targeting a landing at 9:47 and 55 seconds p.m. Central Time, 10:47 and 55, so just a little under 22 minutes from now.
Please keep reporting.
And so at this point, they've passed entry interface. The vehicle now less than 100 kilometers over the Earth's surface. And so with that confirmation that entry interface has started, next they'll be moving into a plasma stage where the entry guidance will actually begin, but a plasma will begin to form around the vehicle that also can start to preclude us getting some of those audio communications with the crew, but they're scheduled to be in that plasma stage for about 5 minutes. And then following that, they'll be just about free and clear to open up the parachutes. Again, the heat shield on the bottom of the spacecraft oriented to protect the crew from all of the heating effects of this re-entry until eventually the parachutes get commanded to open, that coming at about 2:33 GMT, so 9:33 p.m. Central Time. First, that drogue chute coming out, and that'll happen when they're still at about just under 11 kilometers in altitude, or just about 6.7 miles in height. And we're getting our first live views from the landing zone. That's a shot of a Russian Mi-8 helicopter. There's going to be several of those around the landing area, bringing all of the recovery personnel, including flight doctors and the medical tent, and also cargo technicians, to help extract the crew and the small amount of cargo they've carried home with them from the International Space Station. So we'll see several of those helicopters in addition to a number of ATV helicopters. That's the Russian Mi-8 helicopter carrying landing and recovery forces from Zhezkazgan. There's another contingent a little bit further uprange at the ballistic zone should they come in on a steeper trajectory. But we'll see a couple of these circling the landing zone now. We are standing by for the exit from the plasma. That should come in about 2 minutes. And then we'll look for the confirmation of the chute command being given at just 33 minutes after the hour. And again, this is a live view from a camera on the ground on the hunt pretty soon for the capsule. It's still well up in the atmosphere. The crew is going to be exiting that plasma stage in just about a minute or so from now. Scheduled to come out of the plasma at 9:31 and 36 seconds p.m. Central Time. At that point, that'll be the maximum G loads that the crew experiences, about 4 to 5 times the force of Earth's gravity, roughly about what you'll experience on a lot of roller coasters in theme parks, but they'll have it sustained for a short period of time. This will be their first taste of gravity after being in the microgravity environment of the space station for the last 204 days. Again, we're going to be looking for the parachute soon. The command to open the chutes is scheduled to come in just about 2 minutes from now. Again, that'll be 2 different phases. First, the pilot parachutes pull out the drogue, and that drogue does that initial slowing. Then eventually we get to the main parachute. It's one single large main that's going to slow the vehicle all the way down to about 16 miles per hour.
Справа 30. Конец управления. Интеграл плюс 14.
And we just got a report that the crew has established communication with the search and recovery forces out there. Again, they have a number of assets on site, including a fixed-wing aircraft to try and reestablish that comm with the crew. The crew reported they're doing well. They experienced a maximum of 4.8 Gs during that exit from the plasma. So we're going to continue to keep our eyes in the video, look for evidence of those chutes. But we should be hearing that chute command hopefully shortly. But again, the crew has established their contact with the search and recovery forces, the crew in good health, everything continuing to go well with our descent today. The command to open the chutes was the next milestone, and then we're going to be looking for an eventual landing. Again, it's targeted to come at 9:47 and 50, and there it is. So there's the Soyuz spacecraft. You're going to see some white smoke coming out. That's actually excess hydrogen peroxide being vented from on board the spacecraft. But there we have it.
Да, принимаем.
Yes, we copy.
Доброе утро. Вид спуска АУС.
Good morning.
4.
The miss is 4.
0, перегруз
Discrete is 0. 4.18 is the maximum G load. We're feeling well.
Да,
Yes,
спасибо.
thank you.
And again, if you're just now joining, that is our Soyuz spacecraft coming down under parachutes. The white smoke you see coming out is just excess hydrogen peroxide that gets vented prior to the landing.
Peroxide.
It's rare that we get a sight of it this early to even see that event, but pretty great conditions out there for the teams on the ground, able to get a shot of it.
261 and pressure in one of the sections. Copy.
And the Soyuz continuing to descend. Again, this main parachute's going to slow it down all the way to just 16 miles an hour, about 7.2 meters per second. At first, it's angled at about 30 degrees to just help expel any excess heat, but then shifting down to a straight vertical descent. It's going to continue to descend. Hopefully aim to have the capsule land upright, but not unusual for it to roll over on its side. A light breeze in the area today, just a few mile-an-hour wind reported, so hopefully not too much pulling on the chute once it's down on the ground. Everything continuing to go smoothly, though, looking at that landing coming up in just about 10 minutes.
Altitude is, it's blinking right now. There, I don't think it's 30,000 kilometers. 400 millimeters is the pressure in the descent module. Copy. 7 kilometers. Backside pressure 9.1 and 13.1. Copy, thank you.
And losing that signal for a minute, we'll try and get that reestablished with the ground. We should get it back pretty quickly. And there we go. The Soyuz continuing to descend down. We are under 8 minutes away from touchdown. You can see it continuing under that main parachute, again slowing to just 16 miles an hour, or a descent rate of about 7.2 meters per second. Once it's a little under a meter over the ground, the soft landing engines in the very bottom of the vehicle are going to fire, and that just does the final slowing to just 1.5 meters descent rate per second, or about 3.3 miles per hour. For the crew inside, they're strapped into their seats. Each of the seats inside the Soyuz spacecraft has a specially molded liner for each of the crew members, just to make sure that they're as snug and strapped in as possible, as it is still a bit jarring for these touchdowns. Some astronauts describing it as kind of a fender bender in your car, but all of the seat designs and everything able to keep the crew safe when they touch down. Again, we're tracking that to come at 9:47 and 55 seconds p.m. Central Time, and hopefully get some good views of those soft landing engines fire. You should see some dirt or dust kick up when it's right above the ground, as long as we're not looking over any folds in the ground. But continuing to descend down, we're about 6 minutes and 40 seconds away from the targeted landing. And the beeping you're just continuing to hear is just a transponder beacon inside the Soyuz spacecraft. But they have already established voice communications with the search and recovery forces, who are at this point circling around, waiting for the vehicle to touch down. You'll typically see helicopters on the ground just seconds after the Soyuz itself has touched down to begin removing the parachute, safing the vehicle to allow the remainder of the search and recovery forces to move in. It's a pretty quick procedure to get things set up and begin extracting the crew. We'll see them come out one by one and get loaded into just special chairs out there on the Kazakh steppe for them to relax, catch their breath, and get some initial medical checks. With the flight surgeons who are going to be in attendance today, you'll have teams from Roscosmos, NASA, and the Canadian Space Agency all taking part in today's landing to bring these crew home.
Высота барометрическая 20.
Barometric pressure 2330.
Пульс ветра.
Copy. What about the wind?
Принято.
Copy.
Спереди стравилась, надув 5 атмосфер.
Repressed 5 atmospheres. Pressure of the peroxide is 1.5. It has been bled down.
Давид, отбой звука сделай, видишь, мигает.
David, could you acknowledge the sound? You see it's blinking.
Принято. Барометрическая 1600.
Copy.
Красиво смотримся.
If you're just now joining us, that is the Soyuz spacecraft under the main parachute continuing to descend down there in Kazakhstan. You saw a couple of helicopters pass by in the background. We'll see several of them move in, but search and recovery forces from the Roscosmos, NASA, and Canadian Space Agency teams, once this capsule is on the ground, we're targeting landing in just about 1 minute and 20 seconds. Again, the target landing time for today was 9:47 and 55 seconds p.m. Central Time, 10:47 and 55 seconds p.m. Eastern. We'll see quite how close to on the mark they're able to get today. So we should hopefully see some dust kick up once those soft landing engines fire, which takes place just 2 seconds approximately before that touchdown. And you see that puff of smoke, that means the soft landing engines have fired and the capsule is on the ground. So they did make it down a couple of seconds early. We're going to call this landing at 9:47 p.m. Central Time, 10:47 p.m. Eastern Time, down just to the southeast of Zhezkazgan, Kazakhstan. Oleg, Kononenko, David Saint-Jacques, and Mclain back on planet Earth. And so now we're going to wait for those initial reports from the search and recovery forces. You can see on that screen in Mission Control Moscow, one of the helicopters already making its way into the landing zone. Again, the capsule touching down at 9:47 p.m. Central Time, 10:47 p.m. Eastern Time, a couple of seconds before the target, right at the end of that minute. But they are back down on the ground. Oleg, Kononenko, David Saint-Jacques, and Mclain wrapping up 204 days in space with a successful touchdown in Kazakhstan. So we're going to see some helicopters start to move in. We'll wait for reports like whether or not the capsule is upright, and then they'll begin to move in. They will first move in with a small team to safe the vehicle, just make sure any excess fuels on board aren't out in the environment, just making sure that they have a safe area for the additional team members to move in, and then they'll begin the actual extraction of the crew. It's not uncommon for us to lose some video once this team of cameramen starts to move into the actual landing zone, but we'll continue to follow along. Most importantly, though, crew back on the ground successfully. 9:47 p.m. Central Time, 10:47 p.m. Eastern Time. Touchdown of Oleg, Kononenko, David Saint-Jacques, and NASA's and Mclain. if you're just now joining us, you're seeing some helicopters fly into the landing zone, and the capsule is on the ground, successfully descending underneath those parachutes and touching down at 9:47 p.m. Central Time, 10:47 p.m. Eastern Time. It's actually 8:47 a.m. in the morning over there in Kazakhstan on June 25th. It's about 3 hours and 20 minutes after sunrise. The initial force is going to move in to begin safing the capsule, and then we'll see a larger contingent start to move in as they begin the actual extraction of the crew, and also the small amount of cargo delivered down on the Soyuz spacecraft, able to carry typically some time-sensitive items, usually some human research program samples, so things like blood and other samples from the crew themselves that get quickly delivered to laboratories both up in Russia and over here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. We are going to continue to see these helicopters move in, though. Again, we do expect to lose that video signal as teams move into the landing zone, and then we'll get to see these crew members begin making their way out of the capsule with the help of those search and recovery forces and get their first breath of fresh air after 204 days in space. And this is Mission Control Houston. If you're just now joining, we are awaiting the teams to move in on the landing zone. We'll start getting some live video footage from the site where the Soyuz spacecraft carrying NASA's Mclain, Russian cosmonaut Oleg Kononenko, and Canada's David Saint-Jacques has touched down. Did land at 9:47 p.m. Central Time, 10:47 p.m. Eastern Time, which was the targeted landing time. They were a couple of seconds early, not waiting until 55 seconds after the minute, but touching down successfully underneath that final main parachute. The search and recovery forces are now going to move in. Depending on whether or not the capsule is upright, they'll have to erect a ladder to actually begin extracting the crew if it's on its side, which is not uncommon. They are able to pull the crew out, and you'll see them come out one by one. and we're starting to get some initial reports from the search and recovery forces there on the ground, reporting the capsule is upright. They're already with the crew. The crew reported to be in good health, and so the search and recovery forces, they're going to have to erect a stand around the capsule itself that just gives ladders to give the recovery forces access to the hatch on top, and then we'll have a kind of a slide off to the side where they can begin to lower the crew down as they extract them out of the capsule one by one. So again, we're just going to continue to stand by, hopefully get some more live video from the site as teams continue to converge, but the first members of the search and recovery forces have reached the capsule. It's upright, and the crew members and McClain, David Saint-Jacques, and Oleg Kononenko reported to be in good health and ready to make their way out of that capsule and back onto the ground and eventually on their way back to home base. And this is Mission Control Houston. If you are just now joining us, the crew has landed. They were able to touch down at 9:47 p.m. Central, 10:47 p.m. Eastern Time in Kazakhstan. Successful descent and re-entry and landing down there on the step. The search and recovery forces are on the scene, and we are just standing by to get some more live video from the landing zone itself. And we did get some initial reports from those search and recovery forces, the first groups of which have been arriving on those Mi-8 Russian military helicopters, alongside with all-terrain vehicles now converging on the landing site. The capsule was reported to be upright, so they'll have a small stand to erect around the vehicle, which will give the search and recovery forces access to that top hatch, where they'll begin extracting the crew one by one. And again, we are still just kind of standing by until we get those first bits of video, and it looks like we should be getting that momentarily, seeing it on the front screen there in Mission Control Koryov. And there we go, you can see the stand erected up around the capsule itself. The teams have arrived. Pretty soon they're going to start extracting the crew. With the teams out there in Kazakhstan, though, is one of our very own Brandy Dean from NASA Communications. She is out there with the satellite phone with the teams. Brandy, if you can hear me, how are things looking? At the very least, it looks like you guys got a beautiful day for landing.
Yeah, it was great. You could see the capsule coming down under the parachutes the whole way. It was beautiful, beautiful touchdown and right on time. And the crew got here on the ground really quickly. Everybody is gathered up around the capsule now, just waiting for them to begin getting the crew members out there. That should be happening momentarily. And it sounds like y'all have videos, so you'll be able to see it real time.
Yeah, Brandy, we just started getting some first views. Kind of walk us through what's going to be next for the crew on the ground there. What are people going to see over the next couple of minutes once we start seeing them come out of the capsule?
Yeah, they'll get the crew members out of the capsule one at a time and move them over to the chairs in front of the capsule like you're used to seeing. After that, as soon as they've kind of given everybody a minute to do some quick tests, they'll move out to the medical tent, which is already set up and waiting for them. Over there, they'll be doing a number of tests as well, including the field test, seeing how they are able to complete normal everyday tasks after coming back from a 6-month stay in space. And also a robotics test to see how they're able to handle something like the Canadarm following a touchdown. And we are starting to see the crew members come out right now. You have a better view than me. It looks like it's Oleg Kononenko first, which is usually the case with the commander.
Yep, it looks like Oleg's first down. He's going to make his way down this slide here. About how far is it, would you say, between here and those chairs where they're going to get carried over to?
Oh, like 15 feet probably. Not far at all. Looking good to start with. I'm sure the second crew member will be close by. I'm not sure if that will be Ann or David, but they're already turning back to the capsule to start pulling them out as well.
All right, our video's starting to get a little ratty, so we definitely appreciate the updates as they're coming in, Brandy. We did lose that signal just momentarily. We'll hopefully get that back shortly, as we are getting that from a very remote place. And there it is. We got the views back. And there it goes. But we do have one crew member out. Brandy, what's up for the crew after they're through with the medical tent? Do you know which city they're going to be going back to?
They're going to be going back to the airport at Karaganda to get on for Ann and David, get on a plane back to Houston. Oleg will go back to Moscow. They'll be doing some tests at the airport there as well, and of course, once they're all seated in the chairs here, they'll be making some calls to their friends and family to let them know that they landed safe.
Come over here and bring the phone. Could you step away, please?
And Brandy, we're getting a view of a couple of the NASA and Canadian team members there. For our viewers at home, you'll be able to count them out or single them out by the blue flight suits that they're wearing. All of the different NASA landing team members wearing those to kind of pick them out of the crowd. As you can see, there's quite a number of landing forces there.
Reading biometric parameters. Come over here.
Николай Ефимович, у нас данные есть.
Nikolai Ефимович, we have the data.
And here's Ann McClain, waving to the crowd, with her fist to the crowd, looking very excited to be back on Earth and getting a round of applause and response.
And I think we have a few of Ann's friends and family here in Mission Control Houston hearing some cheers from our viewing gallery as Astro Animal makes her way out of the capsule. Again, this was Ann's first space flight, 204 days in space. That's a heck of a duration for a first flight.
She looks like she came through it well. She looks like she's feeling pretty good right now.
Over here towards me. Lift her higher. Looks good. Okay, go ahead and get the data.
And Brandy, we're starting to see the NASA team kind of move in. Again, for our viewers, some of the medical professionals, you can see one on the left of Ann, that's one of the flight nurses, and her flight surgeon, Natasha Cho, just in front of her. They're there just to help get some initial medical checks, see how the crew members holding up, as they're responsible for helping support the crew health both before, during, and after their space flights.
Yes, and astronaut Joe Cobb is also there standing by. He'll be getting the friends and family that she'll be calling on the phone for, and then kind of acting as her advocate as she moves through the post-flight phase and back to Houston.
All right, well, it's great to see Ann McClain back in the ground. Definitely looking like she enjoyed the ride back home. Again, wrapping up her first space flight. We're getting a shot now of the commander. This is also a chance for the crew members to speak to some of their family members via sat phone once they've reached back down here on the ground. So, Bryony, we're getting some good looks of the crew in the chairs. How's it look with David Saint-Jacques, our Canadian astronaut, coming out shortly?
Looks like they're getting close. Not quite pulling them out yet, but should be just the next few minutes.
Okay, these are prime and these are backup.
Really is a gorgeous day for landing. A little on the warm side, but there are literally butterflies flying all around the capsule. The crew members out so far are looking good, like they're feeling pretty good, enjoying being back on Earth, and looks like they're getting closer to getting David out as well.
Yeah, and definitely not looking the worse for wear. It's been quite a long day for these crew members as they are up for several hours, and then it's a pretty long time in those suits and in those chairs. Now in different chairs, but back in Earth's gravity, getting their first breath of fresh air in over 200 days.
Some water.
And here comes David, pulling him out now. Also getting a round of applause and giving a thumbs up to the crowd. working to help him down now. And that's all their members out of the capsule safely in their chairs. So gathering around them here as they sit through a few tests, make a few calls, and then they'll be spirited off to the medical tent for those additional tests.
All right, well, it's great to see all three crew members out on the field there, out of the capsule. Brandy, thanks for the updates, especially as we were waiting to get some of that video. What's up next for you on the flight home? Are you going to be traveling back with these crew members, and kind of what do they still have rest for the rest of their day?
So they, again, will be going back via helicopter to the airport in Karaganda, and for David Saint-Jacques and Mclain, they'll be getting on a NASA plane to make a flight back to Houston. She'll be arriving on Tuesday. And then Oleg will be making his way back to Moscow, and I will not be flying with him. I'll be on a commercial flight, which is probably about as comfortable as the Soyuz was for them.
Well, Brandy, we definitely wish you safe travels back here to Houston, and I really appreciate you giving us a view from down there on the ground. It's great to see the crew members in good health. It's great to have some good landing weather, and really glad to hear you got to see that thing come down under chutes. I bet that was quite a sight from the helicopter.
It was glorious, yes, definitely a beautiful day, beautiful landing, and great to see the crew members back and looking good.
So again, getting a view now of the Soyuz commander, Oleg Kononenko, getting a bit of fruit down here on the ground. That's a pretty usual choice for the crew members once they're back down here on Earth, either a fruit or a salad. Fresh foods are in short supply when you're on board the station for a little over 6 months, typically only getting refreshed from in a small amount from some of these cargo vehicles. But as Brandy's been describing, all the crew's just kind of undergoing some initial medical checks. You can see some of the sensors being applied by the different flight surgeons and nurses, and then pretty shortly they're going to be transported over to that medical tent, and that'll be their chance to get out of these suits that they've been wearing for the last couple of hours.
Well, the vehicle has not failed us. It was as usual. Everything was quite nominal, as expected. We experienced the maximum loads of 4G. It's my third landing. It's the third landing was vertical. I still believe it was a soft landing. We're always happy with it. So as far as the weather is concerned, after you come back from space, we're happy to see any kind of weather. Okay, thank you. Do the Canadian counterparts want an interview?
So again, there's NASA's Mclean down there on the ground in Kazakhstan. Just wrapped up her first day aboard the International Space Station. 204 days in space, 2 spacewalks on her resume. Heck of a time for a first space flight. And for Mclain and David Saint-Jacques, it's going to be a helicopter ride back to Karaganda, and then they'll get loaded up onto a NASA plane. And then it's a semi-long ride back here to Houston. Take them about 18.5 hours. There's a fueling stop built in the middle, and then they'll be back here in Houston and able to get back with friends and family who are now standing by and just about 24 hours away from welcoming her back home. And so now you're just starting to see the crew members get carried one at a time. We'll see a group of people gather around the chairs and carry them over again to that medical tent. It's a big orange inflatable tent set up there on the ground in Kazakhstan where they're able to get them out of those Sokol launch and entry suits, change into flight suits for the helicopter ride back. Again, that'll be about a 2-hour flight back to the main staging airport in Karaganda, where both a plane for Oleg Kononenko is waiting to bring him and the Roscosmos contingent back to the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center. The NASA plane standing by to bring Mclain and David Saint-Jacques back here to Houston. One of the nurses holding a handheld fan. Again, the temperature's in the low 70s there for the search and recovery teams and for the astronauts. Here we can see Kononenko making his way into that medical tent. NASA astronaut Joe Akaba on the right there, giving a helping hand to begin carrying Anne McClain to the medical tent next. And the third and final crew member, David Saint-Jacques, from the Canadian Space Agency, will also make his way over as well. But here we can see Anne starting to make the way over to the tent, being carried by some of the NASA contingent there on the ground in Kazakhstan.
Are you a doctor? He's a pilot. Yeah, there are people who can assist here.
And so again, 2 of these crew members now in the medical tent. David Saint-Jacques will follow shortly. And again, it'll just be a chance for them to get a couple of more initial medical checkups and a chance to get out of those Sokol launch and entry suits and begin making their way onto helicopters, which will eventually take them to Karaganda to get loaded onto planes and head back to their respective home bases. Another great shot of the Soyuz spacecraft, which less than an hour ago was in outer space, and now it sits here on a desert in the middle of south-central Kazakhstan. A number of teams attending to it. There is a small amount of cargo carried down in the Soyuz spacecraft, and that's going to get collected and dispersed to the various teams. We'll have some of those samples coming back actually with the crew for a direct flight back here to Houston. And we will hang for a little while. We could be getting some replays of video shot from the helicopters or possibly from some of the all-terrain vehicles that were in the landing zone as the vehicle was coming down, so we'll wait to see if we can get some of those replays. Again, the vehicle touched down at 9:47 p.m. Central Time, 10:47 p.m. Eastern, wrapping up 204 days in space and on board the International Space Station for NASA's Anne McClain, Canadian astronaut David Saint-Jacques, and Russian cosmonaut Oleg Kononenko. And this is Mission Control Houston. If you're just now tuning in, you did miss a picture-perfect landing, but if you stick around, we should be getting some replays hopefully in the next couple of minutes, including some alternate views, including the helicopter, which had several cameramen on board, and hopefully from those all-terrain vehicles as they were rolling into the landing site as well. We did get a confirmation from the search and recovery forces, all 3 crew members now in that inflatable orange medical tent. So just getting a chance to get out of those launch and entry suits, change into some flight suits, and then pretty soon they'll be making their way onto helicopters and getting on the 2-hour flight over to Karaganda, where they will typically go through a quick welcoming ceremony, getting a chance to receive a few gifts from some of the local dignitaries there in Karaganda, and then they'll say farewell, these 3 that have been together for the last 204 days on board the space station, will say goodbye and go their separate ways. Oleg Kononenko back up to the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center. And for David Saint-Jacques and NASA's Mclain, it'll be a flight straight here to Houston, where they'll get a chance to be reunited with friends and family, and also begin undergoing some additional medical checks and also some more science data takes, just because they're back on the ground, the mission's not yet complete. So a very successful landing day for them. We will